For lesson 3, we are still going to stay with adding and subtracting integers, but we're going to have more word problems or real life applications to look at with adding and subtracting of our integers. So for this next slide, I put on here kind of a little cheat sheet to help you know when you have to add or subtract and what sign gets left. So if you're adding and you're adding two positive numbers, you just add and the answer is going to be positive. That's what you've always done. Then if you have two negative numbers that you're adding together, you still add them together, but then they're both negative, so their answer is going to be negative. If you have a positive plus a negative, you're going to subtract. You're always going to forget about the negative sign for a second, take the bigger number and minus the smaller number, and then you're going to give it the sign, your answer, the sign of your whatever your larger number was. So same thing as if the negative was first, and then you add a positive, or if you start with a positive and add a negative. That rule applies both there. You're going to subtract big minus little, and then give it the sign of the larger number. So over here in the example category, you have 2 plus a negative 5. So I'm going to forget about that negative sign in front of the 5. 5 is bigger than 2, so I'm going to do 5 minus 2, and I get 3. So then I go back up to the original problem. The 5 is a bigger number. It had a negative sign in front of it, so my answer is going to be negative. So I get negative 3. Subtracting positive and negative numbers. If we're subtracting two positive numbers, we just subtract the larger sign, whatever the larger number is, the sign of that gets transferred to our answer. If we're subtracting two negative numbers, then, so for instance, if we had a negative 2 minus a negative 5, when you have two negatives in the middle, that turns to a positive. You're going to add there. So you're going to have negative 2 plus 5. So that rule is going to go back up into the other chart where you're adding with a positive and a negative. You do big number minus little number, so 5 minus 2 is 3. Then you go back to your original problem. The 5 was actually positive because those two negatives turned to a plus. So then your answer is going to be a positive 3. Okay. And then a positive minus a negative, that's where these two negatives would turn into a plus. So you'd actually have two positives you're adding together. And then if you have a negative minus a positive, so for instance, if you had negative 2 minus 5, it's going to look like that. They're actually both negatives. Because remember, we talked about a minus sign is really a negative sign. So we would add those two numbers together and give them a negative sign since they're both negative. All right, so on to the questions here. Amy, Ray, Kim, and Jamal are all on a trivia team. They gain points for correct answers and lose points for incorrect answers. During the contest, Amy gains 3 points, Ray loses 4, Kim loses 2, and Jamal gains 5. How many points does the team have at the end of the contest? Well, let's talk about a few things before we actually solve that question. Which team members can use a positive number to represent their point total? Well, those would be the people that actually gained points. So Amy gained points, and it says that Jamal gained points. So the answer to that question would be Amy and Jamal. And then the next question is, which team members can use a negative number to represent their point total? And those would be the two players that lost points, and that would be Ray and Kim. And then the next question says, write the number that represents each team member's score. So if I go back up here, it says Amy gains 3. So she gains 3, that's a positive 3. Ray loses 4, so losing would be negative 4. Kim loses 2, so lose would be a negative 2. And Jamal gains 5, so we're going to add 5, so it's positive. And then it says, what is the number of points Amy and Jamal gain all together? So those were the 2 positive points. So we had 3 and 5. So together, those 2 gained 8 points. And then what is the number of points Ray and Kim lose altogether? Well, one lost 4 and one lost 2. So they lost a total of 6 altogether. And then what is the team's final score? Well, we have to add the 8 and the -6 together. So I have a positive and a negative. I'm going to do big minus little. 8 minus 6 is 2. And then I'm going to go back and look. 8 was our bigger number. 8 is positive. So our 2 stays positive. So they have a total of 2 points after everybody's scores are added up. All right, now to model it and show it in a picture here. Allie wants to make bracelets to sell at a craft fair. She borrows money from her sister to buy beads and cord. Allie spends $8 on supplies. At the craft fair, Allie makes $17. How much money does Allie have after she pays back her sister? So 2 different charts here. The total that she made is 17, so that larger rectangle is 17, and that is split up between 2 different numbers. So the 8 is how much she spent. So that 8 is really considered a -8 because she owes that to her sister. So if you look over here on my number line, that's where the green bar starts, at the -8, because that's how much she owes her sister before she goes and makes any money. Then she makes $17. So her total profit at the craft fair was $17. So we were in the hole $8. We made 17. So if we made it, we're going to add it. And that's what happens with this green bar over here. We're going to go up 17 from our -8. And then where we land is going to be how much she actually made after she pays her sister. So our -8 that we borrowed that we have to pay back, plus our $17 that we made at the craft fair, will leave us with a total, or Allie with a total of $9. Try it. In a trivia game, Josh gets a score of -4 in the first round and -5 in the second round. What is his total score after the 2 rounds? So total score means I want to add everything together. So I'm going to have a -4 plus a -5. They're both negative, so I'm going to add the 2 numbers. 4 plus 5 is 9. And since they're both negative, my answer would still be negative. You could think about money. You owe 4 and you owe 5, so you would owe a total of 9 to make sure that your answer is correct. All right, next we have a balloon that is 23 feet below a tree limb. Well, if it's below, it's going to be negative. That's the key word there, so -23. The balloon floats up 19. If it goes up, it's going to add 19 feet to its position. What is its position relative to the tree limb? So we were -23 feet below. We were 23 feet below, so that's our negative, and we moved up 19 feet. So they're different signs, so I am going to subtract big minus little. 23 minus 19 would give us 4, and then go back. Our largest number is 23. It's negative, so that means we are still 4 feet below the limb. All right, Indy, Mark, and Tess each pick a slip of paper with subtraction expressions written on it. The person holding the card with the greatest value wins the prize. Who wins the prize here? So we have Indy had 2 minus 3, Mark had -7 minus a -4, and Tess had -1 minus a -7. So I added diagrams to help show the relationships here. So we started at 2, so that's the green bar. We have 2, and then we have to minus 3. If I minus 3, I have to go backwards 3, and we end up at -1. Okay. Then the next person here, which is Mark, has -7 minus a -4. Well, there's those two minus a negative, or two negative signs in the middle. We can combine those and make an addition problem. So we actually have -7 plus 4 for our problem. So we start off at 0 and went to -7 first, and so that was our first number. And then we have to add 4. If we add, we go back to the right. So we went back 4 that direction, and we end at -3. And then Tess has -1 minus a -7. So there's that minus a negative again in the middle. That's going to get turned into a plus. So our new problem will look like -1 plus 7. So the -1 was our first number. So we start at 0 and go back 1. Then we have to add 7. So we're going to go to the right 7 from that point. And we end up at +6 for our final answer there. So the question was, who wins the prize? And the person with the card with the greatest value wins. Well, it looks like Tess is our winner here. She was our only positive answer. All right. Jean and Jerry play a trivia game. Jerry's score is -17 and Jane's score is -24. What is the difference between Jerry's score and Jane's score? So the key word that I noticed was difference. If that word is in your problem, then you're going to have to subtract because you want to know what the difference between the two numbers are. So -17 minus -24. And just like above, if we have minus a negative in the middle, that gets to turn into a plus. So we have -17 plus 24. So different signs, so we're going to subtract. 24 minus 17 would leave us with 7. And then our largest number is 24. It's positive, so our answer is 7. But they just wanted to know what the difference, how far is it between the two scores. So we're just going to leave it +7 because it's kind of like distance. There's no negative distance here. The other way you could have thought about this problem is think about a number line. There's a dot at -17 and there's a dot at -24. How many hops would you need to take to get to the other dot? And you would have to hop 7 times. All right, last question here says the table shows the highest and lowest elevations in Louisiana. What is the difference between the elevation? So there's that word difference again. So I know I'm going to have to subtract. So our Mount Driscoll is 535 and our difference minus, and New Orleans is at -8. So there's that minus and negative again in the middle. That's going to get to turn to a plus. So 535 plus 8 would give us 543 feet. That's what our label is here. Again, you could have thought you're at 535 and you got to get to -8. How many hops would it be? You could have thought about starting at -8 and hopping up to 535. How many hops between the two numbers? Well, you know you have to go from -8 to 0, which would be 8 hops, and then you got to go from 0 to 535, so you have another 535 hops. So you would add the two together to figure out the distance between the two.